Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobook. Marvel, God of Speed. Chapter 41. Boss. Don't get close, just throw the bomb. Seeing that his subordinates wanted to lean over, Raza hurriedly stopped them. The temperature on this monster's body was getting higher and higher, and if he got closer, he would probably die. For Laza's order, his subordinates took out 2 or 3 pumpkin bombs from their arms, and threw them at the monster that had recovered, and the more terrible explosion directly blew the passage into a large crater, and Laza, who was a little closer, was lifted off with a skateboard, and when he stabilized and looked at the bottom of the pit, he only found a black scorch mark, like some kind of burned out meat scrap. Boss, what was that? How do I know? Pack up my things, and deal with all the people here for me. Raza was terrified. If it weren't for the equipment provided by Albert, they really wouldn't have been able to deal with this monster, and ordinary bombs wouldn't have killed him. A quarter of an hour later, the entire base was devoid of a single living person. All the images in the control room had been destroyed, some of the information had been copied, and when Raza flew out, they saw corpses all over the place. Obviously these ordinary hired security guards could not be the opponent of the Green Goblin, even if these were only pirated copies. Boss, this is the information they brought out, and not a single corner has been damaged. Number 2 handed it to Raza with a metal box and said with a flattering expression. Very well, you take someone to plant the bomb and send this place to the sky completely. Thinking of the monster before, Laza's face was not very good looking. His brain could still think clearly. This place is studying this kind of thing. There is only one now, how many may there be in the future? Raza didn't dare to imagine, but at the same time, he looked at the metal box in his hand, and his eyes were a little hot. If they can study it, then why can't it themselves? Albert had told him to pay attention to the research materials, apparently knowing about this situation and planning to manufacture it in batches. Thinking that he might also have that level of power, Raza was excited. As for whether he would become a monster, so what? After seeing the extraordinary horror, he would be extremely eager to become one of them, even if it cost him a mere change in appearance, so what? With a continuous roar, the entire farm was engulfed in flames, and eventually collapsed, burying the experimental base underground, and a dozen green goblin skateboards flew across the night sky, leaving only the rapid sound of sirens. These cops were always so slow that they waited until it was all over to pick up their hands. Why did I receive the news that the base had been attacked? Alert! Killian was awakened by the shrill alarm, and with an angry face, he put on his clothes and looked at his subordinates who had also come to look for him because of the alarm, and asked in a cold voice. 3 minutes from the money base came the news that they had been attacked by unidentified people. The Minister of Security stood up, his fierce expression quite intimidating, but in front of Killian, he looked a little cringe, as if the person standing in front of him was not a little old man who was nearly half 100 years old, but some kind of terrible monster. So what are you waiting for? If your hesitation causes serious damage to the research base, you can go and lie down on the bench. Killian seemed quite pleased with the security minister's wincing, but now was not the time to think about it. The experiment had reached a critical juncture, and there must be no surprises. A group of vehicles drove out of Pioneer Technology quickly, and Killian sitting in the car had a gloomy face. He had spent most of his time in the experimental base before, but there were a lot of things that happened during this time. First, Stark Industries had an accident, which made Killian clap his hands, and then Osborne Industries had an accident, which made Killian have some thoughts and wanted to take the opportunity to buy a batch of Osborne Industries shares in exchange for more research funds. As the experiment got closer to completion, he couldn't wait any longer. He had to do everything he could to finish it, and then let that bastard Tony Stark know that he's not a delusional idiot. He's a genius even better than him, Tony Stark. It's a pity that he doesn't have much money and can't compete with other giant crocodiles, so Killian gave up the idea of acquiring Osborne Industries shares, but he didn't expect to give up, but Osborne Industries began to retaliate. That's right, In Killian's view, Albert's acquisition of pioneer technology is a kind of revenge. In the face of strong capital, pioneer technology has no power to fight back at all, so Killian is afraid of it, and directly sent someone to do the person who presided over the acquisition. This is his warning, although there is a certain risk in this, but it doesn't matter, the desperate virus is almost complete. As long as the virus is completed, no one will care about this stain. But I didn't expect Osborn's industry to stop, and the research base had an accident again. How could this make Killian feel good? Along the way he was in a closed state, and the security guards of the car didn't dare to gasp, for fear that he would be unhappy, and sent them to the experimental table, but they had seen the tragic situation of the people who were sent up. After being injected with a desperate virus, one by one they became living human bombs, and in the blink of an eye, they became a piece of debris. However, their speed was slower than that of the police, and when Killian and his party arrived, they saw the police cordon and the firefighters trying to extinguish the fire. Chapter 42. Boss, it's settled, that place is now only a ruin, and no one has escaped. In the basement of a bar in the east side of New York, Raza respectfully placed a metal suitcase in front of Albert. This is their research material, and it is guaranteed that it is not damaged. Yes, you've seen what's in here. Albert glanced at Raza twice, the guy staring at the suitcase with a bit of eagerness on his face. Obviously he already knew what the contents were for, but he didn't care, the desperate virus was meant to be for them. No, no. Raza hastened to deny it, although he really wanted to see it, but he still held back. The pressure from Albert overshadowed his curiosity, and he knew very well that if he followed a leader, it was better not to secretly engage in something that he didn't have, otherwise he might not get anything. When I was exterminating them, I met a guy who suddenly turned into a monster covered in fire, and ordinary bullets were useless to him, and it took more than 20 pumpkin bombs to kill. They've studied it to this extent? It's a lot faster than I expected. Have you recorded it? Albert nodded clearly, and took a miniature camera from Laza's hand. Every Green Goblin who attacked had this thing on his body, in order to record the process of the battle, not for surveillance, but mainly to prepare for the future. Some guys who encountered in a short period of time could not be killed, and some useful information may be found through the battle records. The whole battle process was not long. Albert spent a few minutes, repeatedly watching the person in charge after the transformation and death. Half finished? There is still some way to go before the research is successful, but the foundation has been built, and Osborn Industries should be able to complete it independently. Half finished, boss. If this situation is only a half-finished product, how strong is it to fully appreciate it? Will it really be immortal? Seeing the other party's superhuman strength again, Raza was even more eager for this kind of power, but he was even more surprised to hear Albert say that this thing was actually only a half-finished product. Hehe, there is a mistake in your understanding. Not everything, the difference between finished and semi-finished products is judged by power. This thing is one of them. In terms of the effect of the show, it is indeed qualified, but the stability is too poor. Albert pointed to the screen. The guy who had just transformed, the desperate virus changed the overall quality, and it would come with extraordinary abilities, but it would rarely appear in this kind of body expansion. Even if you don't care about him, it won't be long before this guy will explode directly because he can't stand the expansion of energy in his body. The desperate virus has not been able to completely solve the problem of stability until it really appears, and when it is injected, it is relative to a physical and will test, and if it passes, it has the power to surpass ordinary people, and if it fails, it becomes a bomb and has nothing. What will it look like if it's actually done? Thinking that he might have done nothing, he blew himself up. Raza shrank his head, but fortunately he didn't think about it, and took the information away and made a copy himself, otherwise he didn't know how he died. It's really done, at least it won't make your appearance change significantly. Most of the external mutations are caused by the controller's inability to restrain all forces, and humans are still too fragile in some ways. Albert thought of the Asgardians, who were far more physically than the Blue Star humans, what would happen if they were injected with the desperation virus, but the thought was only fleeting, and then he walked over to the suitcase and opened it. Now let me see the details. When the metal box was opened, in addition to a somewhat cluttered pile of materials, there were 3 bottles of the potion that had been secured, one of which was marked with a red X. Does it mean failure? The 3 bottles should all be semi-finished desperate elixirs, but these are also used as experimental materials. Anyway, no one should want to inject this kind of thing now, and the specific ingredients still need to be tested in the laboratory. The documentation is quite concise. A large number of adverse reactions have been deleted, either they have been solved, or the subject has died directly in a short period of time, and he doesn't know how to solve it at all, and it took some time to go through the contents. Albert has a full understanding of the progress of the research, and if Osborne Industries' current scientific research capabilities are used, it can be done directly without Killian. This is completely in line with Albert's heart. As early as when Killian decided to play against the rules, Albert had already decided to send him on his way, so he gave Raza the order to kill everyone in the base, including Killian, but unfortunately, according to Laza's description, this guy was not at the base, but let him escape. I'll take the things first. You take someone to sort out the combat data of the Green Goblin, that is your main equipment in a short time. Seeing Raza staring at the desperate elixir, Albert decided to give him a reminder that he could perfect the desperate virus, but it would be difficult to do the physical fitness test, so if Raza put all his hopes on this, if the gamble failed, Albert would have one less loyal dog. Yes boss, I'll do it right away. Raza came back to his senses a little unwillingly, but there was no way. Just like Obadi said, technology is his lifeline. Let him kill people, let him do research. Even if he watches others do research, it will make his head big. Otherwise in the movie, this guy will not be blind. Let Tony build missiles, but he didn't even notice that Tony made a steel suit. Chapter 43. Who is it? Who is it? Pioneer technology. Killian paced back and forth very anxiously. His expression was hideous and kept muttering in his mouth. The destruction of the experimental base was too big a blow to him. He couldn't help but regret being put in the suburbs by the base. At least in New York, even if something happened, it wouldn't be like this. He couldn't react at all. But the research of the desperate virus is inevitably human experiments, carried out in New York City, and it can't be hidden from people at all, although many related companies are not clean. But no one cares about you secretly. Once it is exposed, then you must be killed. Tuk tuk. Come in. Hearing a knock on the door, Killian couldn't wait to let the other party in, and then looked at the other party expectantly. Find out who did it. I'm sorry, neither the police nor our channels have found any traces of the other party. The Minister of Security, who pushed the door in, quickly lowered his head and said with a slight trembling as soon as he looked at Killian. Then what are you doing here? Without getting a satisfactory answer, Killian's face suddenly turned cold, and his eyes full of murderous intent were unabashedly projected onto the head of the security minister, making him, a man who is 1 meter 9 tall, tremble. Boss, I've found a clue. I suspect the attack is related to Osborne Industries. Just as Killian was about to throw out the useless pile of waste in front of him, his secretary pushed the door in and saved the life of the Minister of Security with a piece of good news. Osborne Industries, why? Killian's eyelids jumped, and he looked at his secretary fiercely. He would have died a miserable death if he hadn't given a reason to prove that it wasn't for the sake of saving his life. First, we have an enmity with Osborne Industries, and with their abilities, it is impossible for them to be indifferent to our assassination, so they have a reason to retaliate. The secretary looked at Killian without fear, and explained clearly, in addition, I found that the explosion marks left behind by the Manhattan incident some time ago are very similar to the explosion marks detected at the base. Give me the information. Grabbing the document from his secretary's hand, Killian looked at the detailed comparison and gradually fell into deep thought. He naturally knew that it was precisely because of this incident that all the shareholders of Osborne Industries were killed, and he wanted to get involved in getting a huge sum of money from Osborne Industries. The ultimate beneficiary of Manhattan is, Killian muttered as if asking, and his secretary quickly picked up his question, Osborne Industries' current chairman, Albert. Whoever benefits is the culprit may not be entirely true, but in logical reasoning it is realistic, and Killian doesn't know what's going on, but if you work backwards, the result is obvious. This matter will not be hidden for long, there will always be smart people who want to get it, but unfortunately if you want to sanction Albert, you don't have to think about it, they need evidence, but Killian doesn't need it, he is like a person who is about to drown now, even if it is just a straw, he will desperately grasp it, not to mention that this inference is reasonable. In order to get revenge on him, Albert attacked the experimental base directly and took the most valuable research materials, and if you want to save yourself, you must take it back from him. What should we do? Asked Killian's secretary a little unconfidently. Osborne Industries was not the small role they used to deal with, and in terms of style, Albert was undoubtedly more difficult to deal with than his predecessor, and the current vanguard technology did not have the capital to fight against it. How many desperate elixirs do we have in our hands? Killian also knew the gap, but he didn't have a choice. The experiment could indeed be repeated, although he was not young, he could afford to do it again, but the problem was that he had no money. The experimental base poured almost all the profits of pioneer technology, and now it has been destroyed by Albert. Compared to all this money, and the funds for the establishment of a research base may not be able to make up the funds for selling pioneer technology. Anger rises from the heart, evil is born to the guts, and Killian, who was forced to be anxious, had a bold idea, since pioneer technology can't support the research, then Osborne Industries can, right? Don't do it, take out all the capital, and fight with Albert. Failure will not be worse than despair. If he succeeds, he who controls Osborne Industries, will have all the perfect conditions to complete the research. There are 18 more, but the success rate is too low. If you inject directly, the success rate is less than 10%. The secretary chuckled in his heart, he knew that Killian was ready to fight hard, but when it came, it was the only way. There is also a personal laboratory of mine under the company, bring them all in, and I personally preside over them. Killian looked determined, pointed to the security minister on the side, and ordered under his frightened eyes. He wanted to defend himself, but the mercenary behind him had already knocked him down with a knife, and then more security guards were taken into the underground laboratory. 18 desperate elixirs, diluted to the right dose, can inject twice as many people, but without the large equipment in the experimental base to alleviate the conflict, the chances of surviving are undoubtedly lower. Chapter 44. It has been found out that Albert will be outside of New York City today to preside over the groundbreaking ceremony of the new Industrial Research Center in Osborne. Pioneer, the secretary frantically reported the information found to Killian, and after waiting for so many days, he finally waited for the opportunity. Very well, let number 1 and number 9 prepare to go, this time only succeeds, not fails. Killian slapped the table, and the powerful shock force turned his entire palm red, but he didn't seem to feel anything, and began to gather people excitedly. After the 18 potions were diluted, 36 people were injected, and only 9 survived, but only 5 of them were successful, and although the other 4 did not die for the time being, they also became inhuman, ghosts, or it would not be long before they would be extinguished like a burning candle light. These days, Kirian is having a bad time, his hair is not very thick, but now he has become a lot bald, and he has lost his scientific research base, which makes him almost collapse. If it is not for the last glimmer of hope hanging, he is afraid that he will directly inject himself with a half-finished desperate elixir to seek relief. Today is the last chance. If you don't succeed, you will become a benevolent. Looking at the 5 super soldiers and the 4 monsters in front of him, Killian put all his hopes on them. You should know that if you want to solve your problems, retrieving the research materials is the only chance. You are not for me, but for yourself. If you don't want to die, You will fight for me today, understand? Understood. The 9 looked at Killian's gaze, as if they were going to devour him alive. They were all forcibly injected with a desperate potion by Killian, and after seeing how their companions died tragically, they gained extraordinary power. Not only did they not have the slightest gratitude to Killian, but they were full of extreme anger. However, they can't do it. The incomplete desperate virus not only has a lower success rate, but also has quite strong side effects. Just like the director who was killed, maintaining the combat form for a long time will greatly reduce their lifespan. Even if they don't use the power of the desperate virus, they won't survive for a few months. And the only answer to this problem is the complete desperate elixir, for which they must suppress their anger even if they want to tear Killian alive, because only he can develop a complete desperate elixir. Very good, let's go, control your strength, don't die halfway. Killian said coldly. He didn't care what they looked at him, as long as he could complete the task, but he glanced at the monsters who turned into monsters. His eyes turned into disgust. What a waste! I brought you the power of God, but you can't even pick it up. On the outskirts of New York City, a brand new high-tech park is about to rise, and in the center of the park is the high-tech laboratory personally planned by Albert the Star Laboratory. As the leading top company in the United States, countless celebrities came to congratulate on the day of the groundbreaking. How about Dr. Connors, do you have any ideas for my plans? In addition to the Star Lab in the center of the park, the entire park is divided into 4 parts, 2 biotechnology areas, a materials science research area, and an open exhibition area, where some Osborne Industries products will be placed for visitors to visit for free, and the person in charge of one of the biological areas is Dr. Connors. Of course not, there is no problem with your arrangement, Chairman, and I am very grateful for your trust in allowing me to preside over the research work of a region. Connors looked at Albert with admiration in his eyes. Like a good horse seeing bull, he was treated the best in Osborne Industries during this time, and now he was about to take charge of a complete research area. How could he not be excited? It's you who are humble, Doctor. I have said before, I like to make the best use of people. In Osborne Industries, who else can compare with you in the field of herpetology? Albert said with a smile. He wants this effect. Although Connors is the villain in the movie, his character is not as cold-blooded as a lizard, so he can't be coerced like Liza, and the lure may not have much effect, but this kind of recognition is easier to gain trust. There are people who are injured every day in this world. Some are lucky to have only minor injuries, but there are also many who are seriously injured, and even have to say goodbye to a part of their body like you, Doctor. This is a tragedy, and if your research can be successful, this kind of tragedy will not happen again. What a great merit this is! It is not an exaggeration to set aside an area to do research in this area independently. Seeing Albert say with a serious face, the recognition on Connors's face was even more profound. If it weren't for his high self-control, maybe he would have burst into tears at this time. Boom! However, just as the two were in deep communication, a grenade landed in the center of the convoy, and immediately a number of cars around it were lifted off. Albert's driver quickly stopped and moved forward, and the surrounding bodyguards gathered around him and surrounded him and Connors, looking for shelter. Chapter 45. Continuous bombs flew from a distance, and suddenly the whole convoy was in a mess, but fortunately, the accuracy on the opposite side did not seem to be very good, except for the 2 cars that were directly affected at the beginning. The others were not in any big trouble, and soon the shelling stopped. Probably the other side did not have any shells, and this place also belongs to New York, and shells are not easy to handle. As soon as the shelling on the opposite side stopped, the bodyguards arranged for the passengers to disperse and flee. The number of people in this attack will not be too much. People will attract firepower when they get together, and they will be wiped out, and at least someone can successfully run away when they run away, as long as they notify the official as soon as possible. With the recent frequent vicious incidents, imagine that the police are fast enough. Escorted by bodyguards, Albert approached the New York City by taking cover along the way. As long as he entered the city, the attack would stop, no matter who the other party was, attacking people in the city was an act of looking for death. But the other party had apparently guessed his possible escape route, and after a while, with the roar of the engine, a team of off-road vehicles surrounded them. Judging from the uncovered equipment on the back of the car, it was the person who attacked earlier. Aldreezy Killian. More than a dozen people stepped out of the car, and the most eye-catching among them were 4 strong men with extremely large statures, covered with traces of magma flow. Their faces were already like half-dissolved hot melt glue, and they looked very strange. Ha ha ha, the famous chairman of Osborne Industries, I am really flattered to know that I am a little person. Stepping out of the last car, Killian looked at Albert as if he were staring at his prey, and asked in a sure tone, "Is that you? I don't know what you're talking about, but what are you trying to do? Kidnap me, or are you going to kill me directly?" Albert pointed to the thugs who came up around, without the slightest worry. He didn't expect Killian to be so bold and dare to do it in broad daylight, but this lineup is a bit unexpected. I just don't know if these desperate warriors are prepared in advance or made on the spot. Do you dare to ask me? Hand over the information, and then obey my orders, or I will kill you today. Killian waved his hand, and the group of semi-monster desperate warriors immediately rushed forward, completely ignoring the shooting of the bodyguards, far beyond the strength of ordinary people, and directly threw the bodyguards out of Albert's side for more than 10 meters, and fell to the ground one by one, and suddenly the bones were broken and blood surged, and they couldn't survive. What kind of information are you talking about? I don't know, to be honest. You are more daring than I thought. Is this the so-called rabbit biting when you are in a hurry? Turning his head to dodge the big hand grabbed by a desperate soldier, Albert took a small step back and looked at Killian. This guy has no scientist's demeanor at all now, he is completely a hungry mad dog. What are you doing in a daze, waiting for the police to come to us? Arrest him for me. Seeing that the desperate warrior who caught the air was stunned in place, Killian was angry. Half-finished products were half-finished products, and trying to control the energy in their bodies had already consumed most of their energy, and even their brains were dull. Since you don't want to talk about it, then let's find a place to talk alone. I think you will agree to my request. Why do you have such stupid thoughts? Despair really burns out your brain. As soon as Killian's voice fell, before the desperate warrior could carry out the order, he heard Albert's voice coming from behind him, and a bad chill rose from his back, and Killian quickly turned around, and saw that Albert, who was supposed to be surrounded, actually appeared behind him. What? When did you come behind me? That inexplicable fear spread in Kiri's peace of mind. He glanced at Albert, and subconsciously turned his head to look at his previous position. This look doesn't matter. Killian's whole person was stunned for a moment. It was supposed to be the location of a desperate warrior, but at this time it was empty, and there were no other living people here except him and Albert. Boom, boom, boom. The doubts in Killian's mind had not yet dissipated, and an explosion suddenly sounded in the woods not far away. No more, no less, exactly 9. Tisk, there are no mushroom clouds, and the power of your desperate warrior is a little insufficient. Albert chuckled as he walked into Killian, and with a press on his shoulder, Killian collapsed and sat on the ground, his despair and fear knocking him down. You! How the hell did you do it? Are you a human or a ghost? Killian trembled and pointed at Albert. As a scientist, he didn't believe in ghosts and gods, but what was happening in front of him couldn't be explained by common sense. He couldn't understand what was going on, why he lost everything in the blink of an eye. Of course I'm human, you're also a scientist, don't be so superstitious. Don't you want to talk about it? Then we'll talk. Albert lifted Killian up from the ground, and the red lightning flashed through the ground, and in the blink of an eye, the two of them crossed a distance of dozens of kilometers to a hidden basement. I'll leave it to you, whatever you do, and in 3 days I want him to serve me. Albert threw the stunned Killian to Leza. His heart was completely dissipated. As long as he trained it, it would be a very useful tool. Chapter 46. Director, Albert was attacked on the outskirts of New York City. As Maria Hill approached Nick Fury's office, the director of SHIELD was looking intently at a picture of a square hammer depicting all sorts of intricate patterns, and if it were to be examined by archaeologists, it might be possible to conclude that it was a 1,000-year-old relic. However, in fact, it had just fallen from the sky not long ago, like a meteorite, but before that, the space agency had not found any related fall trajectory. It appeared as if it appeared out of thin air. The result? Someone dared to provoke him. Nick Fury retracted his attention from the hammer, rubbed the corners of his eyes, and asked. He was a little surprised that Albert was attacked, but it probably wouldn't be a problem. Albert's bodyguard was seriously wounded and near dead, but he was unharmed, and a large number of blast marks were found in a woods not far from the attack site, and objects suspected to be human remains indicated that someone was destroying the body. Hill pulled up the photos left at the scene, and the traces left by the explosion of the desperate soldier were very obvious. If an ordinary person dies in this environment, their limbs cannot be intact, but the desperate warrior still retains a certain form, and even after their death, the desperate virus, which remains active, is still trying to repair their body until all energy is exhausted. It's not like an ordinary corpse. Wait, I think I've seen this kind of death before. Looking at the corpse lying in a pit, Nick Fury had a flash of inspiration and grasped something important. Yes, director, some time ago there was also a bombing of a farm in the suburbs of New York City, and under the farm we found a large experimental base, in which there was a body very similar to what was found at the scene. Hill affirmed Nick Fury's idea, and showed the report some time ago. Although the corpse was more tragic, a certain similarity could still be observed, and there was even a corresponding test result. All the corpses were present with the same substance, but the content was somewhat different. Hee, is this Albert being avenged against? Nick Fury sneered, although there is no specific evidence for the farm incident, but SHIELD has already recognized Albert as doing it, and the recognition of the pumpkin bomb is still very high. As the beneficiary of the Manhattan incident, whether it was Albert did it or not, this has been equated with him. And the property rights of the farm belong to Pioneer Technology. This company Nick Fury has not paid attention to it, but the results of the investigation make him also very disgusted. This is a company under the guise of scientific and technological research, secretly conducting unknown human experiments. I don't know how many homeless people died under the farm. Nick Fury can have any good mood with them, although he is black-faced and cold-hearted, but he will not treat this kind of guy much. Unfortunately, it wasn't dog-eat-dog, but a pack of self-righteous jackals that attacked a napping Tyrannosaurus Rex, and Vanguard had no chance of winning. Seal shook her head. She hoped that Vanguard and Albert would lose both, so that SHIELD could take advantage of the fishermen and wipe out the two troubles. But unfortunately the strength of the two was not at the same level. Forget it, let's leave them alone. Is there anything else? Thinking of that old friend's description of Albert, Nick Fury couldn't help but have a headache. For the time being, SHIELD has no good way to deal with it, so it can only be put on hold for the time being, at least for now. Albert has not disrupted the social order. As long as some things are not put on the surface, he should turn a blind eye. General Ross wants us to help capture Dr. Banner. Hill flipped through recent reports and picked out one noteworthy one. Ross. He's got Dr. Banner again? He's really persevering, rejecting him, and we don't have the time to play games with him. Thinking of Rose's face, Nick Fury's expression is not very good looking. This American father, who used to rely on his high status and stumbled on SHIELD everywhere, now he wants them to help. Come on. Nick Fury can't let his people die in front of the Hulk for him. That's a monster at all, not to mention that Nick Fury is still secretly holding back a plan, including the idea of recruiting Banner, and he won't send anyone to help now. Then there's nothing worth noting. Director, do you have any orders? Hill was non-committal, although Rose's name was big, but SHIELD was not under his jurisdiction, and Rose would be able to make a stumbling block, and if it really lined up the scene, Rose was not qualified to interfere with SHIELD. Call Coulson, I've got something for him to do. Nick Fury's gaze fell back to the previous picture, and he tapped on the table and replied, "This is a danger, but at the same time an opportunity." Nick Fury vaguely senses that some kind of change is really taking place in this world. They need allies, and the whole Blue Star needs allies. Watching Hill walk out of the office, Nick Fury pulls out a list: the urbane Bruce Banner, the Furious Hulk, the Bohemian Tony Stark, the Iron Man in the steel suit, and the figure in the ice, Steve Rogers. Chapter 47. The first experiment is ready to start. Osborne Industries Independent Laboratory. Albert listened to the report of his researchers through the tempered glass. After a few days of sorting, the formula of the desperate potion has been listed. Albert is ready to see the actual effect first. Of course, the target is not people, knowing that the medicine is not perfect, and directly going to human experiments is stupid. Let's get started. Monitor the subject's physical condition. After checking to confirm that there was no problem, Albert gave the order to inject the drug, only to see that the researcher in charge of the injection, after skillfully injecting the 8 mice with the desperate potion, quickly left the laboratory table of the reinforced glass isolation. Before the start they were all told that there might be an accident. For their own lives, they did not dare to delay. "Doctor, the subject's body temperature is increasing at an extremely rapid rate, and it is beyond normal tolerance." 30 seconds after the injection of the desperate potion, the mice began to react violently, and as soon as the monitoring researcher opened his mouth to report, traces of magma flow immediately appeared under their fur, and the temperature distortion visible to the naked eye around them. Even if you don't need to look at the temperature instrument, the temperature around them is definitely not something that normal flesh can bear. What is surprising is that at such a high temperature, the fur of the mouse has not changed at all, and this substance, which should be the most flammable, has not changed at all except for the redness of the part close to the epidermis. "Doctor, 3 test subjects have lost signs of life." Less than a minute later, the lights on the instrument went out 3 times, indicating that 3 of the mice had died, but Albert looked at the bench in the middle, and all the mice were struggling in pain, but none of them showed signs of death. Could it be that there is something wrong with the instrument? The other researchers also noticed the problem, and after waiting for a while, someone said loudly when they saw that the mouse still hadn't changed, "No, there's nothing wrong with the instruments, they're dead." Albert shook his head, rejecting his conjecture, and pointed to the mouse on the right side of the bench. "You zoom in and look closely to see what the difference is. It's the roots of the hair have turned black." Zoomed in on the mouse that Albert was pointing at through the camera, and soon found a difference. The mouse still showed signs of life with red hair at the root, while the mouse showing death had black hair at the root. Just like a tree, it seems that there are still branches and leaves, but the roots are rotten. "That's right, keep watching, the real reaction hasn't started yet." In order to make it easier to observe, the desperate medicine injected into the mice was greatly diluted to lengthen the entire reaction process, but even so, as soon as Albert's voice fell, the life signals of 4 more mice disappeared, and then the original 3 exploded, and the chain reaction directly blew the other mice away, and the stump was thrown into the tempered glass. Through a layer of glass, the researchers approached and took a closer look at the debris, and although most of them still had their fleshy form, through preliminary analysis, the debris was more similar to combustion residues, with more inorganic matter than organic matter. Albert didn't stare at those failures like everyone else, but looked at the only mouse that showed normal life before. Until now, its life signal has not disappeared. You must know that even if it is just a guinea pig, the power of the explosion just now is by no means inferior to the average military grenade. Since it can still survive, it seems that the first experiment, Albert got a successful test subject. "Oh my God, it's amazing." Soon, others also found the black marks after the explosion. The mouse that was slowly repairing its limbs, its fur had completely disappeared, leaving only a charcoal roasted body, but it was visible to the naked eye. Its broken little claws were being repaired little by little. 1 minute and 28 seconds to return to completeness. What a terrible regeneration speed. If it is used on the human body, this will create a Superman who is almost immortal. The researchers who participated in this experiment from beginning to end were boiling. If the experiment continued, every single one of them here would be famous for eternity. The premise is that the formula can be perfected, otherwise which of you would dare to try the effect? Albert asked with a smile, and suddenly everyone was silent. Don't look at the success of 1 out of the 9, but those who have read the information know that the actual success rate is much lower than this, and more people will only explode to pieces with a bang like other guinea pigs. Don't be afraid, I'm not really going to let you try. Take care of this little guy, I'm sure it's going to give us a lot of useful data for our success. Albert pointed to the mice that had been repaired and were hitting the glass box, and in order to stimulate their enthusiasm, he added, as long as you succeed, I guarantee that all of you will have their names on the report by then. This is an opportunity to compete with the giants, and I don't think you will give up. Of course not, Dr. Albert, thank you very much for this opportunity. We will definitely do our best to perfect the recipe of the potion. Apparently Albert's incentives were very effective. For them, money and fame were important, and once the research was successful, money and fame were not an issue. Chapter 48. Albert walked out of the lab after motivating the researchers, and it was best if they could actively work, but his hopes could not be all placed on them. Killian was still the developer of the desperate virus, and it was more reassuring to have him in charge. Raza had already sent back the news that Killian had agreed to cooperate, but on the condition that he would take revenge on Tony Stark when the experiment was successful, and Albert laughed and agreed to him. This is a good thing for Albert. The trajectory of Tony Stark's life has begun to deviate from the predetermined trajectory, so Albert has to find a way to test whether he will return to the right path now, and Killian will become a pawn in his hands to correct Tony Stark's fate for him, pointing to a more deviated track. Chairman, this is an application from Lab Number 1. Albert handed the white coat to his assistant casually, and was ready to go to see the acquisition of Pioneer technology, without Killian's resistance. Henry's group of Wall Street wolves were merciless, and the merger should be completed in 2 days. However, just as Albert walked out of the laboratory, the person in charge handed him an application, which made Albert a little puzzled. Lab Number 1? Didn't I ask them to stop the research temporarily? Why did they have an application? Well, that's the chairman. We suspended the research according to your request, but some time ago, Director Harry. Laboratory Number 1 is the laboratory used by Norman to study human fortifiers. Because of the lack of talent to preside over the overall situation, Albert announced that he would temporarily suspend the research, and when he found a suitable person, I can listen to the person in charge. Someone has restarted the research project. Harry. Albert was stunned when he heard the name, and then reacted. He never thought about it. He was indeed capable of conducting experiments, although his performance was always so unqualified in Norman's eyes, but he inherited everything from Norman, including IQ and ability, but it was in the future, not now. Harry was only a high school student now, which was a little too difficult for him. Yes, we can't stop him. The person in charge is a little helpless, although Harry is not very old, but he is the largest director of Osborne Industries, although the power is entrusted to Albert, but it is not something that he can handle as a small laboratory director. Okay, I'll see for myself. Albert waved his hand and didn't blame him too much. After all, in the eyes of most people, Harry would take back power from Albert in the future, and even if they could, they wouldn't dare to take care of him. Record the experimental reactions in detail. I want them all, and if there is the slightest mistake, you can leave. And you, I've been waiting for 3 hours when the instrument I said will be ready. But sir, this kind of instrument requires at least 3 people, and I can't. It alone. Enough, I don't want to listen to these excuses. I'll give you another hour, and if you can't do it, you can leave. Before Albert entered the lab, he heard Harry's reprimand, which surprised him, not to mention anything else. At least the momentum was decent, so he pushed the door straight. And Harry is right, this instrument does require 3 people to operate well, but if one person handles it carefully, it can make it work normally in 2 hours. You are just making excuses to prevaricate him. Uncle Albert. Chairman. Harry lowered his head like a child who had done something wrong, and the researcher named by Albert shuddered even more. Apparently Albert was right. You can pack up and leave, and I'll provide you with a nice severance package. Albert waved his hand, and the bodyguard behind him dragged the dead-faced researcher out, and Albert half crouched down and looked at Harry, who looked down but stubborn. Harry, tell me why you're here. Uncle Albert, I'm... Harry looked into Albert's eyes, his cowardice quickly turned to firmness. I'm going to carry on my father's last wish, I'm going to fulfill his dream. Please, Uncle Albert, can you let me continue my research here? Are you sure you're going to take over your father's research? You should know that this isn't a play between kids, it's beyond your capabilities. Albert touched Harry's head and said softly, he had promised Norman that he had done it, and one night, the genetic disease in Harry's body had disappeared, and he would grow up healthy, marry and have children, until he grew old, but Harry's obsession was so strong. Yes, I'm sure Uncle Albert, I've taught myself everything you need to know, and although I still don't understand it, trust me, I'll learn it all soon, it's not hard for me. Sensing that there was no stern rejection in Albert's words, Harry hurriedly said, his words made Albert a little surprised, wanting to take over Norman's experiments. Harry needed to learn too much, but now Harry told him that he had learned. Okay, I can give you a chance, 2 months, 2 months, I don't need you to complete the follow-up experiments, as long as you can prove that you can really support this lab, I will give you the best support. Albert didn't know what gave Harry the motivation to learn those boring theories and complicated operations, but he felt that he needed to respect his labor, so he was willing to provide a chance. If Harry really did it, then he would have solved a big problem, and if he failed, Harry would be able to give up, and then the research on the desperate virus would be almost over, and Killian could spare time to deal with the research on human fortifiers. Chapter 49. Which one is more valuable, the desperate virus or the human enhancer? In the long run, it is natural that the desperation virus is more excellent, and neither the lower limit nor the upper limit can be compared with the human enhancer, but when it comes to stability, the former cannot be compared. Even if the desperate virus is Killian, there is no guarantee that everyone can adapt to it, so the study of human fortifier still has its significance, and even Albert has an idea, since the process of receiving the desperate virus is a verification of the human system, then if you take human fortensine first, and then use the desperate virus, will it have a different effect? This idea is worth a try, so even if Albert got the formula for the desperate virus, he didn't directly give up Norman's research, and Captain Me was about to wake up, and his blood was a living specimen of super soldier serum. If he could get a little of his blood sample, it should be good for the overall experiment. After solving Harry's problem, Albert returned to his office, and I have to say that Caroline is indeed a very good secretary, and with her hard work, Albert has a lot more free time, so he turned on the TV, poured a cup of coffee and savored it. He had no interest in TV shows before, but after being in this world for so long, Albert developed the habit of watching the news from time to time, and although many people ridiculed American reporters for their top-notch running speed, he had to admit that this group of guys is really capable, and you never know where they can dig up some news. Perhaps to many people, this news is just something boring, but Albert can see more from it, such as the attack on Tony Stark, and he only needs to know a prelude to what might happen next. As always, his habits did not disappoint him, and soon he got 2 pieces of news. A monster was fighting with the army, a strange hammer fell from the sky. Hulk and Thor, the 2 ultimate combat forces of the Avengers. The Hulk is no threat to me, but Thor. Debatable. The Hulk with pure physical output has no pressure on Albert at all, it is impossible to even hit Albert, but Thor is a little different, although his performance in the movie is still a huge gap with Thor's name, but it is serious. the characters who exist in the history of human mythology, the prince of a powerful alien civilization, at least have to give some respect. Hulk is uncontrollable, Thor is no matter how much he gets it will be very troublesome, who let him have a good father. It is estimated that his every move in Blue Star is in the eyes of Odin, and he has been on the blacklist of the Ancient One. Albert really doesn't want to provoke this old and immortal God King again. But when it comes to Thor, Albert forgot one thing: the ether particle seems to be one of the Infinity Stones, and it is also the easiest one to get. The cosmic cube is in the hands of Shield, and there is no place for the time being. The time gem is in the hands of the Ancient One, and now when it comes to her, a bald mage, Albert has a toothache, and there is only one ether particle, unguarded, and there is a chance to take advantage of it. Back then, the ether particles were snatched from the hands of the Dark Elves by Asgard and sealed, and now that seal has almost weakened to the extreme, it is the best time to obtain it. As for the Dark Elves that may come, Albert doesn't care at all, and has the ability to be positive. In his heyday, he couldn't get Asgard, and he was robbed of the ether particles, and Albert didn't even bother to look at this kind of street goods, and when the time came, with the ether particles, he could even live a few tricks with the Ancient One, just a dark elf, and he didn't know they. As for Asgard, as the sealer, will he pay attention to the ether particles? Don't even think about it, he will definitely pay attention to it. As soon as the ether particles came out in the movie, they went directly to Thor's girlfriend. If you want to say that this is a coincidence, you don't believe it when you kill Albert. Why do so many people choose her? But Albert doesn't have to worry about this problem at all. Thor has entered the Blue Star, so it depends on whether Odin cares more about his son or the ether particles. Even if he overestimates the combat power of the Asgardians, Albert will not be afraid of ordinary warriors. Even the level of the 3 warriors in the movie, he will not care much. If Odin wants to prevent him from getting the ether particles, he must send more people down, but will the Ancient One agree? Albert guessed not. A Thor who does not have much power will come down to experience the experience. The Ancient One will not have any opinions, but a group of experienced Asgardian warriors enter the Blue Star. This is the rhythm of preparing for war? Thor is still in the Blue Star, Odin dares to send someone over, and Thor will be unlucky in an instant. So, sometimes enemies are not always enemies, and the Ancient One is a threat to Albert, but also to others. She can be a very reliable bulwark. Of course, there is also a slight possibility, the Ancient One and Odin are in contact, and at the same time against Albert. This possibility is not very likely, but it cannot be said that there is none. For both sides, Albert is an unstable factor. If he moves the ether particle, Odin will definitely have the idea of making a move. As long as the Ancient One closes his eyes slightly, this idea will turn into a fact. Albert thought a lot, but still decided to look for the ether particle, not only because it was important to his future plans, but also because his soul was burning, and if passion was at a low point for a long time, it would always cool. And if he could really provoke 2 powerful beings at once, Albert would become famous, and this was also part of his plan: change and shock, and the same applies to the growth rules of the Speed Force. Chapter 50. On the east coast of the United States, Albert jumped down the cliff against the salty and wet sea breeze. The speed of the god roared in his body. Before falling into the sea, his speed had surpassed the fastest fighter of the modern era. Even the propulsion speed of the rocket escaping the gravitational pull of the Blue Star could not be compared to him. In this case, the sea surface was peaceful in his eyes. There was no difference. Just in the blink of an eye, the entire coastline was far from his back. The speedster is only at his best when he runs, and Albert has to admit that the feeling of leaving everything behind him is wonderful. And for a moment he even wanted to just keep running so that he doesn't have to pay attention to anything, but the real feeling quickly faded, and in just a moment, he had crossed the Atlantic and landed on the shores of the English Empire. If there is no problem with memory, the ether particles should be in an abandoned factory in London. Of course, it will be abandoned in the future, and the current situation is not very clear, but there is no problem with the general direction. Anyway, it won't take Albert long to walk around the whole of London. Is it right here? Standing in front of a sparsely populated factory, Albert stretched out his arm and saw the speed force wrapped around his body, trying to stretch in one direction, where it longed for something, the ether particle, the location of the gem of reality. Although it was not completely abandoned, there were not many people in the whole factory. A few security guards were bored and dozing on their posts. Albert crossed them, followed the guidance of the speed force, and came to a building that had not yet been built, and when Albert approached, the speed force suddenly beat like a wild horse on the loose, beating wildly on the surface of his skin. Well, that sounds right, but how do I get in? Although the location is here, the ether particles are sealed in another dimension, and the seal has not been broken like it was later, allowing the energy of the ether particles to leak out, and even if Albert has special equipment, he may not be able to find the door to enter. Standing under the building and thinking about it, he decided to follow the guidance of the speed force. Since it was so urgent, then it must be able to find the entrance. Albert walked towards the deepest part of the corridor, and when he passed through a corridor, the light in front of him suddenly dimmed, as if the moment he stepped in, it turned from day to night. Albert's heart moved, and he continued to move forward with the same face, and soon reached the end of the corridor, which was a room that had been abandoned for a long time, and his keen sense of touch made him feel something different, and the whole room was densely filled with an invisible field, like a magnetic field, but more brilliant. Woo! The next moment, the speed force burst out from Albert's body. The unstoppable force destroyed the fragile balance of the invisible field in an instant. A door appeared in front of Albert. Before he could react, a strong suction force pulled him over. Albert raised his eyebrows, and subconsciously wanted to get out of the suction range, but what surprised him was that even if he was moving, his body still entered the door in the next second. What's the situation? The speed force is useless? No, my speed just now, no doubt reached its limit under the impetus of the speed force. Something changed my movement. As soon as he entered the door, the suction disappeared, and when he stepped on the ground, Albert immediately began to reminisce about the feeling just now. It was a rather awkward experience, even more awkward than when he was fighting against the Ancient One before, and was pushed against the space. At least he could feel his movement before, and he could have a direction to run, but not just now. Albert was like running towards the door, but he was obviously running towards the opposite place. There was no transformation of space, only in that moment, reality was changed, worthy of being a gem of reality. Albert cast his gaze into the entire space. The only place where the light shone was emanating from it. Two square stone pillars pressed tightly together, and a dark red fluid was flowing slowly in the middle. Ether particles, how do you get them out? Albert raised his hand, and was somewhat surprised to find that the previous manic speed force actually tended to be quiet at this time. As long as he didn't manipulate it, it was like a deep sleep completely fitting to the surface of his body. In this case, Albert didn't want to forcibly use the speed force to break the two stone pillars. Once the ether particles were affected, an unimaginable disaster would definitely occur, so he could only circle around the stone pillar twice, and then ran around the entire space, and soon found the seal traces left by Asgard. This should be it. Lifting the ground with his feet, a mysterious circular pattern was imprinted on the ground, which was the trace left by the Rainbow Bridge teleportation, and it was also the node of the entire space, and Albert only needed to offset its energy flow to make the stone pillar that suppressed the ether particles move a little away and take it out. With the speed force under Albert's control, flowing into the pattern on the ground, an indescribable sense of distortion began to spread throughout the space, just like using a tool to violently pry the door lock. With a crisp cracking sound, the two stone pillars were full of cracks, like melting ice cream in front of Albert's eyes, and fell to the ground softly, and the ether particles were free. Chapter 51. It seems to have a certain consciousness. Looking at the ether particles swimming around him, I don't know why, Albert felt a trace of emotion from it, but because it was too weak, Albert was not sure if it was his own delusion. Is it possible for the Infinity Stones to have consciousness? Possibly, at least the soul gem retains a certain amount of consciousness, but the ability of the soul gem itself is interoperable with this aspect, so it is not possible to place consciousness with other gems giving birth to consciousness. These are two different concepts. In addition, the Infinity Stones also have the possibility of giving birth to consciousness, that is, the seventh Infinity Stone, the consciousness of the nemesis of the origin of the Infinity Stones, the golden rough stone called the Stone of Self. When it comes into contact with the 6 Infinity Stones, it will reintegrate into the nemesis, but if the Stone of Self is destroyed, the other 6 Infinity Stones may have consciousness in a short period of time, and even appear in physical form. However, there is also a premise for this situation, that is, there is a master consciousness, and after it is split, it will live on other gems, and consciousness will be born. Albert is not sure if there is a self-stone in this world, and the DC world. The Marvel Universe also likes to play with parallel worlds. Some worlds have things, and another world may not have them. Moreover, even if the ether particles caused by this are conscious, then several other gems should also be conscious, so this possibility can be basically ruled out. A little confused, Albert stretched out his hand and wanted to bind the ether particles through the speed force, but to his surprise, the moment he stretched out his hand, before he could use the speed force, the ether particles took the initiative to surpass his arm and wrap up. They were like countless red snakes, after a short temptation, quickly seeped under Albert's skin. The strong feeling of swelling pain made Albert's expression quite ugly, but he did not use the speed force to resist or remove the ether particles, because when it entered his body for the first time, Albert clearly felt the kindness and gratitude it transmitted, and his previous feeling was not wrong. The ether particles do give birth to a meager consciousness, but under normal circumstances, no one can detect it. Even if it is fused with the ether particles like the dark elves, it may not be able to perceive it, and only Albert, a speedster who raises perception to the extreme, can feel the emotion from that fleeting information. With Albert's active acceptance, the pain of forcible expansion began to disappear, like a clear spring flowing through the dry earth. Albert's whole body became extremely refreshed. When he opened his eyes again to look at the world, he felt a trace of reality. He couldn't say what was different from before, but it just felt that the world was more real. It's a good feeling. It's like a person who is more than 1000 degrees short-sighted and puts on glasses, and the whole world looks much clearer. Albert stretched out his hand, and the crimson speed force and the red-black ether particles were actually fused together in a balanced way, just like the flow of water conducts electricity, and the God speed force, an outsider, with the help of the reality power of the ether particles, successfully went deeper into this world. Now, you've become a 2 and 5 boy too. Looking at the ether particles that were very active in the palm of his hand, Albert said with relief, it was not good to fight alone, and now he finally had a companion. However, the ether particle didn't seem to understand his words, but only extended a tentacle and gently touched Albert's palm, like a pet licking the palm of its owner, and a sense of closeness was transmitted to Albert's heart. Seeing this, Albert just smiled, then closed his eyes, carefully feeling the changes brought by the ether particles, and soon under his guidance, a layer of blood-red armor like crystals began to spread on his body, and at the moment when the armor was about to close in Albert's chest, the speed of the force suddenly beats, and a trace of lightning is imprinted in front of him. Well, the flexibility is perfect, the defense is perfect, and the fusion with the speed force is perfect. This is the right time. After a few simple running stances, Albert said with great satisfaction, every time his joints bent, the armor in the corresponding part would soften, perfectly fitting his body movements, and there would be no change in his defense. Although Albert appears to be wearing armor made of red crystal, the ether particle still exists as fluid, but it just looks like it. But if the enemy thinks it looks fake, then the ether particle should teach him what it means to be real. As theoretically speaking, the strongest Infinity Stone, the ether particle has the ability to interfere with reality and change the established rules, that is to say, any damage to Albert will be distorted by reality, Even if it will not disappear completely, it will be greatly weakened. This is the strongest shield for Elbert, plus the strongest Mao God speed force with infinite destructive power. At this moment Elbert feels that he is already invincible. If he faces the Ancient One again, he doesn't mind a life and death fight with the Ancient One. Chapter 52. Just as Elbert took out the ether particles, Asgard and Odin were watching Thor's every move through Heimdall's eyes, watching him ecstatic after learning of Mjolnir's whereabouts. Odin couldn't help but shake his head, turned to look at his other son Loki. His eyes also flashed with disappointment, but the next moment, Odin's eyes widened and turned to the position of the blue star. Heimdall, look at Midgard, someone has touched the seal of the ether particle and found him. Odin's one-eyed eye shone with a divine light that was difficult to look at, and a powerful oppressive force erupted from his aging body. Even Heimdall, who had been familiar with it for thousands of years, couldn't help but be frightened. But Heimdall was still looking at Blue Star for the first time, and as a watcher who followed Odin forever, he naturally knew the meaning of the ether particles, but when his eyes fell on London, he couldn't see anything, only darkness. I beg your pardon, I can't find his whereabouts, but he probably hasn't left the sealed land yet. Heimdall admits his incompetence. His eyes can see through the 9 realms, but there are things he can't see. His eyes are useless in the face of a distorted reality. It's not yet time for the ether particle to be born, and someone must be sent to stop that person. Odin said without hesitation, and then he began to close his eyes. His spiritual power began to diffuse, communicating with a certain being through the Rainbow Bridge. About a few minutes later, Odin opened his eyes. Open the Rainbow Bridge, let Tyr take someone to reseal the ether particles. Heimdall did not hesitate to receive the order, turned the heavy sword in his hand, and a colored light connected a palace in Asgard with London in the blue star, and soon a tall and strong man in silver chainmail appeared outside the factory. The napping security guard watched in horror as Tyr's divine soldiers descended from the sky, but Tyr was in no mood to greet them, and directly smashed the gate with a sword, swaggering towards the subspace where the ether particles were sealed. At the same time, in the more distant star field, there is no light here, only darkness and eternity. A huge black giant ship slowly emerged. It was quietly suspended in the dead silence of the boundless starry sky. On its internal control platform, one after another lights lit up, and a certain fluctuation from the distant void triggered its restart mechanism, so that the black giant ship got the signal and began to recover. Click! There was a soft sound, and as the sleeping cabin of the main control room of the giant ship opened, a man whose face was as pale as a dead man suddenly opened his eyes, and after a short period of confusion, his consciousness gradually returned, allowing him to slowly sit up from the sleeping cabin. He stared at the dots of light on the virtual screen above, and he knew the world, the Midgard of the 9 extremes, where they had been defeated, where Asgard had defeated and taken away the ether particles, forcing them to abandon their people and flee to this far-flung star field alone, enduring the humiliation of defeat. The ether particle has reappeared. My people, wake up, the glory of darkness is about to return. As his words fell, all the dark elves who had survived the bloody and brutal war began to awaken, and the dark forces that once dominated the universe opened their eyes again. It's a pity that they are no longer the civilization they once were, and the warships that originally covered the sky and the sun are only the only flagship left, and they don't need to be done by others, and they will be left to fend for themselves in a short time. After a brief recovery, the last remaining dark elves gathered on the bridge, their eyes focused on the leader Malekith, the only act of their civilization. Malekith looked at the dark starry sky outside the bridge. The infinite ambition in his eyes rose again. The scars of his past defeat were still faintly painful, but this did not make him give up revenge. Now that the ether particles have reappeared in the world, they have hope. It is time to take back what belongs to them, and let the Asgardians really see what eternal darkness is. But before that, I need fighters who are strong enough. Glancing over the people standing on either side, Malekith shook his head slightly. Although they were all experienced in battles, they were still far from what he wanted, and even the most powerful Argrim, his deputy, was still not enough to meet his requirements. Malekith opened the resource warehouse, looking at the almost empty scene inside. His brain was even more dizzy, although the energy consumption of these years of sleep has been minimized, but the accumulated consumption of thousands of years is by no means a small amount, and the resources that escaped from the battlefield in a hurry have long been consumed. Eventually, Malekith retrieved a black hedron from the warehouse, the product of the stripping of ether particles, which had been used by the Dark Elves to create powerful warriors in bulk, but now, there was only one left, which meant that only one of the last powerful warriors would be born among them. Malkis looked at his deputy. Argrim understood that he was ready to sacrifice. If it wasn't for Malkis, he would have died on the battlefield with his compatriots, so he decisively turned to face Malkis. I am willing to sacrifice myself, just like our people, and give everything for you. Poof! The blade pierced through the armor, and without hesitation, Malekith stabbed through Argrim's body, pressed his forehead against Argrim's forehead, and whispered, "You will be darkness, and remain in this form until it drains your life." Subsequently, Malekith sent the hedron into Argrim's body through the wound, waiting for the fusion of the two. He will soon get a good warrior, but this is not enough. There was not only one dark elf back then, but he had no choice. Until then, our enemies will no longer be your opponents. Grim endured the pain, whether it was a wound or a fusion with the cursed stone. It was an extremely painful thing, but he did not hesitate, and said to Malekith with great firmness, "I will destroy their defenses and help you rebuild a new universe." Chapter 53. When Albert walked out of the room, the first thing he saw was a strong man dressed in a style very different from that of modern society, looking at him with a long sword, and the other party's eyes were full of contempt and pride, and there was also a raging fire of war that would not be extinguished. "Human, hand over the ether particles, or I will carry out your death myself." Tyr locked on Albert for the first time, and there was no other life around, and that was his goal. "Hee, then you can try it." From the strong man's dress like Thor, Albert can see the identity of the other party. It seems that the worst has happened. The Ancient One did not stop Odin from sending someone to intercept him, but it doesn't matter, as long as Odin doesn't come down in person. He doesn't care who is in front of him and what kind of myth is circulating. Without too much nonsense, this god of war in Norse mythology showed his words. Force can always solve the problem, at least the solution itself. Since Albert is unwilling to hand over the ether particle, then kill him first, and bring the body back to Asgard is the same. Tyr's speed and strength were worthy of his name as a god of war, at least enough to crush Thor at this stage, and as he leaped up, the entire ground shattered in an instant, and the long sword that slashed in mid-air split the air, and a sharp edge that was impossible to look at swept down. "It's too slow. If that's what you're relying on, Odin can collect the body for you." However, Albert did not move, mocking Tyr's speed mercilessly, and before the god of war could make a complete expression of annoyance, the entire time and space seemed to freeze at this moment, and the speed of the god was activated. Albert's body bent slightly, and he jumped from the ground like a spring, and punched him in the abdomen against Tyr's slashing blade, and the next moment time returned to normal, and Tyr's whole body flew out as if he had been hit by a rocket. Albert was suppressed the whole time during the battle with the Ancient One, so it was completely impossible to see how powerful his power was, but in the face of Tyr, he completely showed how terrifying the power of a punch can be in the case of supersonic speeds. "You're not dead yet, should I say your life is really hard enough." With the immunity of the speed force, the power of the shock had no effect on Albert. He picked up Tyr's long sword from the ground, came to Tyr, stepped on his chest, and pressed the god of war who was still trying to get up. "Now, do you have any last words? I underestimate you, but you shouldn't underestimate any of the gods of Asgard. Give me eternal sleep in the ice." Tyr's eyes widened, and he almost roared as blood gushed out of his mouth, but his arrogance did not fade from his injury, but only became more and more arrogant. However, the next moment, looking at the square box emitting a faint blue light in Albert's hand, Tyr's voice seemed to be choked, and his face was incredulous. The ice box, a frost artifact from Niflheim, is a great idea, but it's a shame that it's an idiot like you with a brain stuffed with muscles. Albert's hand swelled with a dark red fluid, engulfing the ice box, and the mockery on his face was even worse, and he didn't even have a chance to open it before he saw it. Goodbye then, may your Valhalla accept your soul. Albert lifted his sword and stabbed Tyr's heart without hesitation, and when the blade pierced the chain mail, the first drop of blood flowed out from under Tyr's skin, and a strange sensation invaded Albert's body, even causing a fluctuation of ether particles under his skin, and then it was like a video rewind, and everything returned to square one, until Albert walked out of the room again. Seeing this, Tyr did not panic at all, and immediately groped around his body, but soon his face became ugly, and everything was back, except for the icebox. The Ancient One. Albert didn't pay any more attention to Tyr, but looked into the air, and although he couldn't see anything there, he knew that the Ancient One was there. Albert. With a sigh, the Ancient One walked out of the portal. He became stronger again, and the Ancient One even regretted a little, maybe he shouldn't have let Albert go in the first place. I really didn't expect you to let this barbarian operate in the Blue Star. You are not worthy of the name of the Guardian. Albert squinted, wary of the Ancient One, while the ether particles and the speed force flowed wildly in his body at the same time. If the Ancient One appeared, then what about Odin? Tyr is the messenger of the god King Odin, and he is not here for war. Guyi shook his head, seeing Albert's vigilant posture. She was also quite helpless in her heart. She didn't want to make a move, but Tyr's defeat was too fast. She could let Tyr enter the Blue Star, but she couldn't watch him die here. But I think he just wants to go to war, and you won't be unaware of the power of the ice box. It's a weapon of war, not created to deal with a certain person. Listening to Albert's words, the Ancient One's face was indeed not very good. Odin did not mention the ice box when communicating with him before, which made her feel that she had been deceived, but this is not the point. No matter what price Odin will pay for this, that is a matter for later, and now the problem is to stabilize Albert. Chapter 54. Isn't the information equal? Hehe, it seems that I still take advantage of it. From the words of the Ancient One, Albert knew a lot of things. At least she and Odin were not really wearing the same pants, otherwise Odin would not have hidden from her that Tyr had brought the icebox. As an artifact of Niflheim, the permafrost, the icebox is not a weapon against a single person. It is a weapon used in legion wars, and once opened, it will turn the surrounding environment into frozen ground in a short period of time, and the ice giant can be like a fish in water in this environment. Once it is opened, it will be devastating to the surrounding environment. If the Ancient One knew that Tyr had come to the Blue Star with this thing, he would never let him succeed, otherwise the English Empire would enter the Ice Age, and even if she had the time gem, it would be difficult to deal with. However, this pot can't be thrown to Odin. I believe that if the Ancient One elaborates on how terrible Albert's speed is, Odin will send Tyr down to die when he is sick in his brain, which is not a situation that ordinary Asgardians can deal with at all. There was a gap in the communication between the two, which gave Albert a chance. Not only is it difficult for Odin and the Ancient One to ride the tiger now, but he also picked up a cold ice box for nothing, wrapped in ether particles. The Ancient One can't get the gem when he has time, and in his hands, he still wants him to return it, and the fool is talking about dreams. Even if it can't be used, it looks good as an ornament. And I have to admit one thing, that is, the ice box is one of Albert's weaknesses, or one of the weaknesses of the speeder. When the temperature is low to a certain extent, it can even make time and space stagnate, atoms freeze, and the speed force will become slow. Although Albert doesn't know if the ice box can create such a low temperature, but after all, it is a hidden danger, and it is safer to keep this thing in his own hands. What do you want? He can't die in Blue Star, that will lead to war. Guyi was helpless, and when she couldn't do anything about Albert, and Odin, who was also staring at this, also had a helpless look on his face. He had misestimated Albert's strength, and he had to pay the price for it. No, Isn't Thor still in North America, and if Odin doesn't want to lose his son, he has to accept the bitter fruit. A smile appeared on Albert's face, and since neither of them was going to tear their faces with him, then things would be easy. You're exacerbating the conflict. The Ancient One gritted her teeth. She knew very well that Albert was just talking, he was waiting for their sincerity, otherwise Tyr would have to stay today. And what do you want? Albert shrugged his shoulders and spread his hands, motioning for the Ancient One to come up with a plan. As long as he was satisfied, then it could be treated as if today's incident had not happened. Asgard no longer interferes with the ether particles, and you have Tyr return to Asgard with the ice crate. The Ancient One didn't answer Albert immediately, but said after an interval of 2 seconds. However, it was obviously impossible for her to satisfy Albert. Not enough, and the ice box is my trophy, and I am not the vanquished, so why should I hand over what I have in my possession? The ice crate can be given to you, but you can't interfere with Thor. This time the Ancient One was silent for a longer time, but in the end he regressed. Yes, I wasn't going to trouble the prince in the first place, but Asgard has to promise not to trouble me in the future. Take it when you see it. Albert knows very well that although he has made Odin and the Ancient One compromise, it does not mean that he has the ability to challenge the two of them at the same time. Everything is just because Albert is barefoot and not afraid to wear shoes, and they want to think too much about things, and getting an inch will only make both sides look bad. Yes, as long as you don't take the initiative to cause damage to Asgard, they won't take the initiative to attack you. This time the Ancient One answered quickly. Obviously Odin also wanted to end this embarrassing negotiation quickly. He had never been so embarrassed in thousands of years, not only almost killed Tyr, but also fell into the hands of the Ancient One. Who knows when Midgard actually appeared? This kind of freak, there are few monsters in the universe that can compete with him. Then make a deal, and you can leave. Albert glanced at Tyr with contempt. The gods were not known for their name, but for their divine power, and a god who did not match it was a complete joke. What's even more ridiculous is that this group of guys is still high above the gods. If it weren't for Hela who set off Ragnarok and destroyed Asgard, and after a few years of absorbing all kinds of black technology, the humans of Blue Star would have taught them what the authority of the terrifying Homo erectus was, just like European adventurers did to the Native Americans. I'm still saying that, I hope you don't go down the wrong path. Seeing that the Rainbow Bridge fell a pillar of light and brought it to Tyr, the Ancient One was also relieved and opened the portal to the temple, and then she had to talk to Odin about why Tyr had the icebox. Of course, I've always been on the right path, all the time. Seeing Guyi leave, Albert smiled. He won this game again, but there will be no next time. The bottom line, this kind of thing will not be infinitely lowered, but one can be 2, not 3, next time there will be a disturbance. Guyi is afraid that it will not be so soft, so Albert will cherish this last opportunity, or don't do it, or if you want to do it, you will make a big mess in the world at one time. Chapter 55. In the solar system, a huge warship hovers in orbit between Blue Star and Mars, and in a unique dark stealth mode. Conventional technology cannot detect their tracks, and as the former owner of the ether particle, the Dark Elves do not just use it. After all, it is a complete civilization, and they have also developed a lot of unique technologies from the study of the characteristics of ether particles, among which dark invisibility is the most prominent one. Even Heimdall's eyes cannot peep into the battleship that enters this state. It exists in reality, but it is also between illusion. The ether is gone, it can't be, said Malekith. His pale face flushed, and he checked the star map in a furious manner, but the results still showed that the signal of the ether particles had disappeared from their monitoring range. For a moment, Malekith's mind turned 1,000 times, but he quickly calmed down. The ether particle could never disappear, its own existence was equivalent to this universe. Malekith did not believe that anything could wear out the ether particle. Then there was only one explanation: someone hit him, like the Asgardians did. Who could have done it? Some thief stole the ether particle, but was soon discovered by the Asgardians and resealed it. Malekith began to make up the plot on his own, and if that was the case, it would be troublesome. Don't look at the movie. He dared to attack Asgard directly, but that was because he was sure that the ether particles were there. As long as he was desperate to take it back, it didn't matter if the other dark elves died. But the problem now is that if the ether particle is sealed in Midgard by the Asgardians, then he will not attack directly. Unlike Asgard, who has only one main city, the range of Midgard is a little too big for the dark elves, who now only have one warship left, and if they do not fully control this place at the first time, Asgard may transfer the ether particle, and then there is no idea where it will be placed. Agram. Staring at the blue planet outside the porthole of the battleship, Malekith finally gave up the assault, at least until the whereabouts of the ether particles were determined, and he couldn't startle the snakes. You take people to Midgard to secretly find the whereabouts of the ether particles. You must be secret, and you must not let the Asgardians find out your traces. Yes. Grim fell to his knees on one knee, and loyally drove him to fulfill every order of Malekith, whether it was his order, whether it was fighting or lurking. He didn't need to ask why, he didn't need to know why, he just had to carry it out. In an instant, several small scythe-shaped black battleships flew out of the huge cross-like flagship, and quietly landed on the outskirts of London without anyone noticing, which was the last place where the ether particle signal appeared. And just when Malkis and the others appeared in the solar system, Elbert had already returned to Osborne Industries, and then he was busy. The construction of the Star Laboratory began to progress steadily, and the desperate virus was also rapidly approaching completion after Killian confessed, but it was Harry's side, the progress of research on human fortifiers, which made Elbert quite sideways. Perhaps Harry had really inherited Norman's legacy, or perhaps something else was influencing him, and Harry had managed to solve a few problems that had been bothering him for a long time despite his apparent lack of expertise. However, after reviewing the experimental logs, Elbert was sure that these were all coincidences, and that a small deviation at the right time and place had turned what should have been a fruitless experiment into a standard studyable sample. Elbert wasn't sure if there was a cosmic will behind this coincidence, but for now this was a good thing. The only pity was that coincidences weren't always available, and after a period of rapid progress, the progress of the experiment began to come to a standstill. If it can't introduce new variables, it will remain in this state for a while, but Harry has already made his wish, and in the midst of that unknown coincidence, Elbert has decided to keep him in charge of the human enhancer, maybe when. Of course, these are not too big surprises for Elbert, whether it is a desperate virus or a human fortifier, as long as it goes on step by step, it will eventually reap the fruits, and what really surprised him was, "Ivan Vanko, I heard you want to join Osborne Industries, why?" Standing in front of Elbert was a stout man with a weather-beaten face that looked more like a boxer than a scientist. "Because you said that you will give every qualified scientist the greatest opportunity to develop, and I need this opportunity." Ivan Vank was carrying a simple box in his hand. Seeing Elbert looking at the box, he did not hesitate to put the box on the desk, and then opened it very violently, without the intention of honestly unlocking it, but looking at the position of the lock of the box, it had long been twisted into dishappen. Obviously this was not the first time he had violently opened the box. "I know this thing, Tony Stark's new invention, and he also patented it." Looking at the contents of the box, Elbert was not surprised. The miniature reactor, no matter the shape or material, could not be compared with Tony Stark's. It was more like some discarded materials were randomly found and spliced together. If it weren't for the fact that Ivan Vanko would indeed make this thing, Elbert would even think that this was a model made by a vagrant. Chapter 56. Stark is a thief like his father. Hearing Tony Stark's name, Ivan Vanko's emotions were obviously excited, although who was right and who was wrong in the matter back then has been regarded as a result, but you can't let a person who has lost his father think calmly. Whether Stark is a thief or not, the problem now is that Tony Stark has registered a patent, and even if we have the technology, we can't use it openly. If you can't use it openly, then use it in secret. Anyway, the energy provided by the microreactor is indeed quite powerful, and as one of the world's problems, there is always a place that needs it. But you need him, give me a lab, and it will be yours. Ivan Vanko stared into Albert's eyes, believing that no one could refuse this request, and that the value of the miniature reactor was well worth it for Albert. And then, what are you going to do? Revenge on Tony Stark? Albert didn't answer Ivan Vanko immediately, although he was a little surprised by his arrival, but some questions still had to be made clear. Let Ivan Vanko take revenge, it would be to shoot himself in the foot, and he was not Justin, who would carry the pot for Ivan. Is it fair that his father took my father's gains and drove him out, and they lived a rich life in an international city, while my father and I were going to live in the slums? Why can't I get revenge? Ivan said with a twist of his neck and a look of hatred. Why can Tony Stark be the brightest light, while he can only be moldy at the bottom of society? I have no intention of stopping you from revenge, but what are you going to get revenge on? Albert fiddled with the reactor and the two flashlight-like things next to him, and said disdainfully, Tony Stark has the best resources, the best economy, the best brains and the best room for development, but what do you have? Even the technology is backward. Show you something, I hope it won't hit your confidence. With that, Albert turned on the projector, and a video file was opened, showing a picture taken from a fighter jet, a UFO passing at a speed of more than Mach 2, and then the video switched to a satellite perspective, and the true face of the flying object was seen. It was a steel humanoid, and the golden color scheme made it look quite good, but Ivan recognized what was on its chest, the miniature reactor. The next picture is Tony Stark manipulating the steel suit and fighting with a group of terrorists, which is completely one-sided, although he does not have the same experience as in the movie, resulting in Tony Stark not becoming a real Iron Man at all, but as a scientific researcher, Tony Stark needs to have a place to conduct actual combat tests, and these terrorists have become the best targets. Well, what do you think your chances of winning? Cutting off the video, Albert looked at Ivan, who was silent, and seriously, he didn't think Ivan had anything to compare to Tony Stark, and now their skills weren't much different, at least in essence, they were on the same level. But after a while, Tony's steel suit will improve by leaps and bounds, with more efficient use of energy, more variety and more lethal weapons, and what does Ivan have? A pair of electric whips that can only be used against ordinary people? It's too low, and it doesn't even need Tony Stark's shot, a pair of slightly coordinated soldiers can take him down. I underestimated him, but I would never throw in the towel. After a moment of silence, Ivan admitted that he couldn't do anything about Tony Stark now. Judging from the performance on the video alone, his so-called plan was not even a 10% possibility. He silently closed the suitcase, ready to leave here, but Albert's hand pressed against the lid. Don't leave in a hurry, I'm showing you this, and I'm not trying to belittle your incompetence. You're right, the technology of the microreactor is valuable to me, to the vast majority of people. Albert looked into Ivan Vanko's eyes, he saw confusion and puzzlement. I'm just trying to make you sober up. Don't challenge Tony Stark without your own strength before you have the ability, that will only harm others and yourself. Can you help me? Ivan gave up his intention to leave. He knew he needed Osborn Industries, and after seeing Tony Stark's steel suit, he knew that he could no longer study alone, then he would never be able to keep up with Tony Stark, let alone take revenge. Of course, an independent laboratory will fully satisfy your requirements, and I will also open up Osborn Industries' secret project for you, and maybe you can find what you want in it. Albert smiled at the success of his plan, and another department head from Osborn Industrial Park was in place, and to get that, you need to show your loyalty to me, to Osborn Industries. So, what about your answer? I accept it all. Ivan Vanko gritted his teeth and replied with great firmness, I don't care what you want from me, I have only one request, defeat Tony Stark. Chapter 57. Chairman, are you sure you want to start the injections directly? I suggest that it is better to do human experiments to confirm it. Osborne Industrial Laboratory, Killian is persuading in a cold sweat. Anyone who is looked at so viciously by 7 or 8 black men in green goblin suits, will not feel relaxed. If the experiment goes wrong, Killian feels that he will not see the sun tomorrow. No need, didn't the report you submitted already indicate that the desperate elixir had been developed? Are you not confident, or are you simply perfunctory to me? Albert himself held a special syringe and tilted his head to look at Killian, while Raza lying on the bed also stared at Killian, as if he would jump up and blow his dog's head as soon as he said a word. Of course, the desperate elixir has been successfully developed, and I will never dare to perfunctory you on this issue. But you should also know that there are always some discrepancies between experiments and the actual situation, and I mean that it is safer to try to maximize the success rate of each time through human experiments. Killian's face became even more distressed, and he worked overtime for several months to finally finish the final work of the desperate potion, but Albert pulled Raza and began to inject without saying a word, and Killian almost jumped in fear when he found out. He knew the danger of the desperate elixir very well, even if he had perfected everything that could be perfected, but just like there is no free lunch in the world, he had to pay to get it, and while he could make people gain superhuman abilities, he also had to bear the extremely high mortality rate. Killian originally thought that Albert would be more cautious when using it, but who knew that Albert didn't even have the idea of further testing, so he directly injected Laza, the henchman, and as a result, he was now trembling. Once something went wrong, then it would definitely not be with Albert. He could only take the blame and look at the green goblin standing next to him. Killian, who also looked like a Russian man who was not easy to mess with, could only try his best to persuade Albert to slow down. He didn't want to gamble his life on the success rate of desperate elixirs, and even he didn't dare to inject himself. There's no need for that, Killian, you've got a wrong question from the beginning. What I need has never been an absolutely stable potion, and the current potion is perfect for me. Albert's eyes flashed, and then without giving Killian a chance to speak, he pushed the potion in the syringe directly into Raza's veins. Chairman, what do you mean by that? Killian looked at Albert very puzzled. He didn't understand the meaning of Albert's words. He didn't need a stable elixir of desperation? You'll understand later. Albert didn't answer Killian's words directly, but looked at Raza on the laboratory bench, who was suffering from the desperate virus and brought about rebirth. His skin turned red rapidly, his skin was like cracked earth, and magma-like blood seeped out of the cracks. It's over. Killian's face is dead. This is the most direct manifestation of a failed injection, and based on previous experience, Raza will be completely reduced to a pool of lava in just half a minute, and his life may end here. Don't be so anxious to judge. Do you think I will be a person who is going to gamble on a vague probability? Seeing Killian's face like a bitter melon, Albert just smiled. He would not gamble on the success rate of a desperate potion. The reason why he started the injection so unprepared is naturally because he has absolute certainty, although Raza is not his real subordinate, but at least he is loyal enough, and everything is done well, so he can't let him die like this. As the words fell, Albert's right fingertip pressed against Laza's heart, and the dark red fluid poured into Laza's body like a small snake from his hand, and in his amazement, this substance that Killian had never seen before re-established Laza's body system, and the cracked skin began to return to its original shape, and the pain seemed to begin to subside. This is... Killian's surprise grew again, and not only him, Ivan Vanko and the others also stared at the dark red fluid extending from Albert's arm. The condition of Raza just now was dead no matter how you looked at it, but this was the kind of thing that pulled him back from the ghost gate. It seems to have worked. Stand up and give it a try. Retrieving the ether particle, Albert is very satisfied with this. It is worthy of being a gem of reality. It can do much more than what is shown in the movie. As its name suggests, it is the essence of it. Theoretically, it can turn all the user's thoughts into reality, and forcibly reversing the failed result of the desperate potion into success is only one of the small applications. I feel great now, as if I have infinite energy, strength and Raza stood up from the test bench, waved his fists in the air with both hands and made a note, then turned to a piece of unmanned tempered glass, and the palm of his hand was directly pasted on, and suddenly a blazing light appeared on the contact surface, and the intense heat just blinked an eye, melting the tempered glass that could resist the high explosive grenade into a transparent palm print. Not bad, so who's next? After a short test, except for the lack of obvious growth in speed, Raza has greatly improved in other aspects, so when Albert proposed the next one, Ivan Vanko, who couldn't wait, pulled away Killian, who was still amazed in front of him, and decisively lay on the experimental table. Chapter 58. Tony Stark's villa. Potts helped Tony sort out the clothes and wine bottles that were thrown on the ground with a disgusted face. I remember I came to help you tidy up the day before yesterday. What is going on with you? I don't care about the company's affairs. I know how to drink every day. You have never been like this before. Hiccup. What's wrong with that? I think it's pretty good. There was a wine burp. Tony didn't care and took another sip of the wine bottle, watching Potts help him clean up. A tingle flashed in his cloudy eyes, but there were some things he didn't want to say now. It would only make both of them painful, so Tony could only pretend to be relaxed and asked, "What's the matter? Haven't I already entrusted you with carte blanche to handle the company's affairs? I'm already retired. Someone has designated to see you, saying that they have some questions to talk to you." Putting the things on the ground back where they were supposed to be, Potts pulled out a letter from the bag he had brought with him and handed it to Tony. "Didn't I say that no one was missing?" Tony took the envelope and opened it with an unhappy face, and looked at the big sign on the letterhead. Tony knew who sent it. "Oh, Osborne Industries, I remember them. Their new chairman invented a new type of material that works very well, but why did he look for me?" After scanning the contents of the letter at a glance and 10 lines, Tony casually threw it aside, and he didn't mention anything about it at all, so he looked at Potts. If it was just this letter, it was impossible for Potts to come to him. "Albert, the chairman of Osborne Industries, is also our shareholder, holding 3.8% of the shares, and I think it's important for you to meet him," Potts said helplessly. Although it is not as good as Stark Industries, but Albert's equity in his hands, plus his own capital, is enough to affect many things. Tony could not care about that, but Potts couldn't. She couldn't fall out with a shareholder when she first took over the company, so she had to go to Tony. "Okay, I'll find my time." Looking at the helplessness in Potts's eyes, Tony suddenly regretted that he shouldn't have put the burden of Stark Industries on Potts' shoulders, but now there is no way to change it, and his life is not long. How's Tony Stark's situation? SHIELD, Nick Fury was in a good mood looking at the report handed by Coulson and Barton, which should have been sent to him before, but it took a lot of time to deal with the legacy, secretly intercept the remains of some of the destroyers, or fight with the group of people in Congress. But as he thought, Thor and Blue Star have a pretty good relationship, and they have also found a girlfriend, which is a good sign and may provide a springboard for friendship for him and the whole world. The palladium poisoning has left him a little depressed, and Stark Industries has been handed over to Ms. Potts, and if he continues, he may kill himself before he is completely incapacitated. A beautiful figure with red hair stood in front of Nick Fury. As the person who picked up Tony Stark in the Imperial Cemetery, she used her skillful skills to gain Potts's trust, although she did not directly go undercover for Stark Industries, but she would not miss out on what she should know. "Hehe, this unruly prodigal son also has today." "Wait, only in the most desperate moments, the light scene is the most dazzling. Continue to monitor his situation." Nick Fury even wanted to clap his hands a little. Tony Stark's personality really made people want to punch him in the face, but he couldn't really let him die. That would be too much trouble. You choose the right time to hand over Howard's relics to him. "No problem," Natasha said confidently, and then she was about to leave, just in time to pass by Hill, who came over, and the two nodded before parting. "What's the matter?" Seeing Hill come to him, Nick Fury's good mood immediately went down halfway, and often this kind of time means that he has trouble to deal with again, and it is the kind of thing that involves some big people. Although SHIELD is subordinate to the Security Council, this is the United States, and everything has to be considered for the bald eagles, but some people will not give SHIELD situations, so when they encounter some things, they will generally be difficult to deal with, soft ones don't work, and tough means are not easy to do, which makes Nick Fury very big. Yes, very troublesome. Hill's expression was rather serious, and it was clear that what had happened was just as troublesome to her. According to the agent's report, Dr. Banner is in New York. What? Nick Fury was startled for a moment, and then looked at Hill with a changed face. What about Rose? Does he know about Dr. Banner in New York? As much as I was tempted to say no, he actually knew, and the agents had discovered that General Ross was maneuvering. Hill shook his head and recounted what he had gotten. He might be shooting directly at Dr. Banner in New York. Is he crazy? This is not the primeval jungle, it's New York. Does he know what the crime of mobilizing troops here is? Nick Fury instantly felt that his head was going to explode. The previous Manhattan incident, they finally managed to settle the group of capitalists, but Rose actually wanted to stir their nerves again. Is he crazy? Chapter 59. Gotta stop him, that old thing Rose is completely insane, damn it, does he think that with his connections, he can suppress the consequences? No way. Nick Fury walked around anxiously. For the sake of Hulk, Rose's sanity was equal to nothing. He thought that the exploits he had made would keep him. If it was before the Manhattan incident, as long as there was a suitable reason, it was really not good for Ross to be punished too severely, but now it is different. Once Ross does it, whether he has a reason or not, his life is over. Even if he successfully catches the Hulk, he has no chance to study it. Ross should have seen this clearly, but he has long lost his mind in his mind. Rose's life and death. Nick Fury is not in the mood to worry. In his opinion, this old guy is clean when he is dead, but if New York explodes, SHIELD will not be able to escape the blame. Did it die? Hey, I'm Nick Fury, what's going on? The urgent electric bell rang, and Nick Fury quickly picked up the microphone and asked, eager to have good news. Director, I'm late, General Ross has already left the barracks. Hill's voice came from the other side, and it immediately made Nick Fury's heart sink, but her next words made Nick Fury feel as if there was a chance to turn around, but he didn't mobilize a large force, just took a special operations team with him. There's only one special operations squad? Okay, I see, you stay in the barracks and stop anyone from leaving. Nick Fury hung up the phone, and he was relieved. Fortunately, Ross didn't let the army enter New York City directly, just a special operations team. Even if something went wrong, it could be explained, but he still didn't dare to relax. Let Hill stay in the barracks, to prevent Ross from transferring reinforcements. Although things don't seem too troublesome, if Nick Fury knew who Ross took away, it wouldn't be so easy, and what New York City will stage at that time is not an inspirational drama of brave soldiers versus green monsters, but a musu plot of two monsters fighting hand to hand, and the unequaled can only be innocent New Yorkers. In a rather elegant-looking cafe in downtown New York, Albert was quietly drinking coffee, flipping through a Bible. He was waiting for someone. In fact, he didn't want to see Tony Stark. After all, it didn't mean anything to him, whether he did something or not. Tony Stark's illness would be cured. But the vengeful Ivan Vanko reported one thing to him. In addition to him, there are some other forces staring at Stark Industries, one of which is obviously protective, and the people he sent have been warned several times by accident and crossed the line, and even recently killed directly at home, which is standard military style from the point of view of the method. This incident gave Albert some ideas. If SHIELD is protecting Tony Stark, then he will definitely not let go of this opportunity to brush up on goodwill. In the movie they did just that. Took out Howard's relics at a critical moment, so that Tony Stark successfully healed, and then although Tony Stark has been hard-mouthed, his attitude towards SHIELD is obviously different from that of other government departments. But what if Tony Stark's illness has been cured before Shield takes out Howard's relics? I believe that with Tony Stark's character, there will be no good feelings for Shield, which obviously has a way to save himself, but is about to get stuck, and if he doesn't do it, he will secretly retaliate back. Since Tony Stark's illness is destined to be cured, then it is better to let Albert come, not only to provoke the relationship between the two, but also to make a fortune from Tony Stark. Why not? I heard you're going to see me. Just as Albert had finished his second cup of coffee, Tony Stark appeared in a rather messy outfit, and in the continuous yawning, a strong smell of alcohol erupted from his mouth, making most people reluctant to stand in front of him. You're in worse condition than I thought you would, like a hangover bum. Albert wouldn't like this bad experience either, so he said unceremoniously that there would be no discord by finding a dumpster and throwing the current Tony Stark over. Hee, the homeless don't have to think about how to spend tomorrow at least, but as a genius, I think about too many things, and occasionally being so relaxed and relaxing helps physical and mental health. Pulling out a random chair and sitting down, Tony asked for a glass of liquor as if he couldn't see his current terrible condition. I think if you continue like this, you might be in the barrel before the disease takes your life. Watching Tony pour the liquor in a casual sip, Albert was a little speechless, but he could understand that the more he knew, the deeper the despair became in the end. As a genius, Tony Stark will not give up until the last step, but he has searched all feasible solutions, showing that there is no way to cure himself. This kind of despair is the most terrible, for an ordinary person, in the same situation, although they will also despair, but they know that there are still many things in this world that they do not understand, and there will always be a glimmer of hope. But for Tony Stark, there is not even this vague hope. He knows everything, all possible solutions are in his hands. This despair of knowing that all the roads in front of him are dead ends, is enough to break Tony Stark's spirit. No disease in this world can come close to me. Did you know that I have so many medical teams, and although they are sometimes annoying, they do keep me healthy. Tony bowed his head for a moment, and then quickly returned to normal, but he wondered why Albert mentioned this. He knew his condition? Chapter 60. Come on, Tony, since I'm talking about this, I prove that I know your situation very well. There's no need to go around in circles in this regard, our time is precious. For Tony Stark's denial, Albert smiled. No one wants a stranger to know that his body is not good. This is based on the most basic sense of self-protection, not to mention that there is a Stark Industries behind it. If Tony's physical condition spreads, Stark Industries will have a big accident. You're right, our time is precious, so if you joke about such frivolous things next time, don't invite me again. Tony slammed his glass on the table, stood up with an angry expression, and after showing his displeasure with Albert's offense, he prepared to leave. Palladium poisoning. Albert only said 3 words before Tony Stark's footsteps paused, but he still did not stop, but quickened his pace to leave the cafe. Albert did not mind, but watched him leave, and continued, I have a way to keep you alive, if you are willing to pay the price. Seeing Tony Stark leave without looking back, Albert just continued to smile, and then prepared to return to Osborn Industries. What should be said has been said. As for whether Tony will take the bait, it depends on how strong his desire to survive is. As Nick Fury said, the biggest desperate side, the hope scene is the most shining. Bang! However, just as Albert walked out of the cafe, a car was thrown to the side of the road by a huge force, and an unusually burly monster with a height of more than 3 meters and a barbed creature on its back was rampaged down the street. Abomination! It seems that our General Ross got away with it. Ignoring the panicked bodyguards, Albert regained his previous position, poured himself a cup of coffee again, and leisurely stared at the screaming crowd outside. Don't move! Or I'm going to shoot! This is the main road in Manhattan, and the police are still very strong, and several police officers quickly arrived at the scene and put the police car across the road, but in the face of such a monster, they inevitably felt frightened, and took out the guns in their hands with trembling. Bang! However, this warning was meaningless to the already mad abomination. In the face of his strength, a few police cars were directly lifted away, and the policemen who were lucky enough to avoid were in a panic, regardless of whether they aimed at the target or not, and frantically pulled the trigger. The metal bullet hit the abomination's body, and even his skin could not be pierced, but this fly-like bite made the abomination feel bored, so the next second, he grabbed a car in front of him and slapped it at the nearest policeman. "Get out of the way, don't get in the way, you ants, I'm not interested in fighting you weaklings, Hulk, get out of here." The vehicles collided with each other until they were completely deformed. The slightest friction of the sparks ignited the fuel tank, and in the blink of an eye, a powerful explosion directly overturned the policeman hiding on the side, and in the raging flames, the hideous body of the abomination stepped out. The explosion had a little effect on his skin, but it undoubtedly made him look more violent. "General, what are we going to do?" In mid-air, a helicopter gunship hovered, looking at the demonic abomination below. The pilot swallowed his saliva and asked General Ross with a nervous expression. "Shoot the missile and kill him for me." Rose's face was full of anger. He thought he had controlled the hatred, but like the Hulk, he couldn't control anything. It was like tearing open a bloody scar, which made Rose extremely angry, and he didn't care about anything else. He wanted to erase the shame in front of him. "But General, this is a downtown area, and there are still citizens in the surrounding buildings who have not escaped, in the event of an accident." Ross doesn't care about anything else, but the driver can't care. Hearing Rose's order, he almost cried. Once the missile is launched here, his life will be completely over. "Shut up! I said kill him, beat him to meat sauce for me." However, Rose did not listen to the driver's words at all, but became even more angry because of his rebuttal, and his bruised forehead rested on the back seat, and Rose roared at the driver. Seeing this, the pilot knew that he could not change Ross's decision, so he could only press the launch button in resignation, and suddenly the missiles on the gunship dragged a long tail flame, and went straight from the rear to the street and was making a big hate. However, just as the missile was about to hit, Abomination suddenly turned around, and a large hand accurately grasped the missile that was attacking him. A mocking expression appeared on his face, and then the missile exploded, and the flames consumed Abomination. Without waiting for the flames to go out, Abomination jumped out of his own accord. The power of the explosion tore through his skin, but it didn't work. The powerful recovery power allowed this small damage to recover quickly. Abomination showed a hideous smile at the helicopter in the distance, and then twisted the street lamp next to him, held it in his hand and threw it like a javelin. At this moment, a figure fell from the tall building, and when he got up again, he had turned into a giant with a green body, and he jumped up and grabbed the street lamp thrown by the Abomination, and Hulk entered. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.